cities as key to a green and sustainable European future. She actually outlined some of the existing funding for cities now. She was talking about 24 billion euros, which sounds like a huge amount, but I just calculated it's about 3% of the overall European budget, so it's not that large. Maybe it could be enlarged. I think we will talk about that. We will talk about the realistic chances of having more direct funding, perhaps also best practices, and what the next European budget from 2027 could bring for cities. And my first question would go to Katalin, Czech. And the question relates to, you had a speech in the European Parliament in 2022 where you called for more direct funding for cities. How was that speech received in the Parliament? Are there any parties which are supporting this idea? How do you see the political reality behind such a proposal?
Well, thank you very much. And first, let me thank the organizers of having me in this very special location that I think is very dear to the heart of everybody who still cares about islands of freedom in Hungary. I hope that this beautiful building will be used for more and more activities, including educational activities, which we all know and cherish this building for. But using this occasion to discuss the future of funding for cities, I believe it is also a key part of discussing the future of European democracy. You mentioned that I had speeches, or like more speeches, not only one.
It was a proposal, and it was a report.
Yep, on this topic, and I just really want to be very specific here. This was part of our key proposals for our voters when we ran for elections in 2009. We spent a great part of our mandate working to advance this cause, and I really think that something is moving in Europe. And you know, it was fundamental for me to try to put this issue as high on the agenda as possible, because as a Hungarian citizen, as a Hungarian politician, when I'm on the road and when I talk to people, I really see that citizens are hurting. Citizens are hurting because the Orbán government has been using European funds to weaponize it, to restrain these funds from citizens who chose to elect a democratic alternative. And this is nowhere more visible than here in Budapest, a beautiful city with a very competent leadership that has been pushed to the brink of bankruptcy only because citizens chose to speak their mind. And I believe that this is an absolutely disgraceful situation where we can be at in Europe, where we as European taxpayers really have to demand reforms for. Because European budget is there for all citizens, no matter what they think, no matter what they vote. It is there for advance our common causes and to push it forward. And this is why I authored a report in 2022 indeed, which was speaking about the future of cities and which had very explicit calls for increasing direct funding streams for our local communities. And this report was voted with an overwhelming majority in Parliament, more than 2/3. That's like an interesting number here in Hungary. And so this really shows, I think, the realization of the entire European community that this cause matters. And I have to say that we already have some quite significant achievements in this mandate. Throughout hard work in the Parliament, in many groups, I have to say, but with a lot of direct work from our part, we managed to push for an increase in direct funding that is available in the entire European budget, and we managed to increase the total directly available revenue from 280 billion euros to 320. More or less. So this is a quite significant increase, I have to say, and we already are seeing results here. Let me just tell you how happy I was when I received a call in my office a couple of days ago from the Budapest 8 district. This is a district where a very hard battle is going on between the opposition mayor and the local Fidesz, and of course this district is not receiving any sort of help, but now they have won their second directly funded European project, and it is just like so great to see the results of our work being manifested as results for our voters. What is the future? Well, and I think we will spend a great part of our panel discussing that also, but I think this is really only the beginning, and this parliament has been laying the foundations of the next multi-annual financial framework that is coming up. And I really want to say that this is not something unrealistic that we are proposing. There are direct streams, and we have to push for enlarging them. We have to push for keeping them more afloat, and we have to push for also greater realization all across our European community that directly accessible funds for our citizens matters not only for those who live in autocratic countries, but matters for everybody who cares for a stronger Europe, a Europe that is more united, more cohesive, and where the powers are distributed at the level where they should be. Because I believe that the closest level to where people live, to the level of decision making, that is where problems are most felt. And if we can strengthen cities, we strengthen communities, we strengthen people, we strengthen Europe. So I'm looking forward to working on this issue also in the next mandate, and to push for the significant and groundbreaking reforms that are needed, not only for our Hungarian citizens, but I think for our entire European Union.
Thank you, Katka. This was kind of a, you set your eyes on the future as well, but let's talk a little bit about the present. Benedek, Jávor, you wrote an essay, quite an extensive research on what are the current funds available directly for cities. Commissioner Ferreira outlined some of those, but could you share with us some of the findings of this research paper? I mean, what is the situation we are having now? And then we can look into the future in the next round of questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And really, we for the political capital, we drafted a quite detailed study on the situation of accessing cities to European funding, not only about direct funding for cities, and I prefer to talk about perhaps a better access of cities to EU funding than only direct funding, because this is about much more than simply the direct access or direct management scheme of the funds in the European budget. But before talking about the details, I would like to point out a little bit that why it is important to talk about funding of cities at the Budapest Forum. Not only because, of course, the municipality of Budapest is one of the co-organizers, and something must have been given to Budapest that we talk about some city issues at the forum, but also because I believe that the question of democracy in Europe depends very much what is happening in our cities. Partly because of the reasons Commissioner Ferreira already talked about, that many joint European targets and goals heavily dependent on the performance and delivery of the cities. Either we talk about the climate targets, the EU climate targets, digitalization, social goals, refugees and migration, whether it's about refugees from Ukraine or other types of migration. Cities are always in the front line of dealing and managing these goals and challenges the EU has. So how the cities are able to perform in these areas, it deeply influences the success of the EU in these areas. And how the citizens of Europe will regard the EU as a successful actor in these areas depends very much on the cities. On the other hand, also I would like to underline what Katka already mentioned, that cities are the closest governance level to the people. And very often cities are also a kind of laboratory of democracy. Very often participatory democracy techniques and public participation is much stronger in the cities. And that's what, and in the previous panel it was already mentioned, and if I remember well, what a surprise, a city leader, Tomislav Tomašević, mentioned it from Zagreb, that the EU must be democratized before preaching to populist governments to be more democratic. And this could be learned from the cities, and practices and techniques could be learned from the cities, because in the cities this is happening in a much more active way than on the European level. So that's also because, and also there is another political layer of this question, which was already mentioned again by Katka, but what of course the Commission is always very neutral, and Commissioner Ferreira was not able to address this problem openly, but let me to be straightforward on that many of the democratic challenges of the EU is happening again in some cities like Budapest, like Warsaw, and some other cities, where the populistic extreme right governments are using even the EU funds as a punishing tool to influence the political decision of their own citizens, and to punish cities which voted against the national governments. And I think that this is an extremely dangerous example for the EU, and the EU should address this problem, and direct funding or better funding for cities from EU sources is a way to address this question and to help the cities to survive in a hostile environment of their own national governments. With all that in the background, we can talk about the techniques, how to finance in a better way cities. And of course, we already have some direct funding schemes. And again, these were mentioned, like the European Urban Initiative, or the increasing Life Plus or Horizon programs, which are directly managed budget schemes of the EU. But compared to the EU budget, this is still a marginal financing model. And in addition, even which is regarded as city financing, and it was labeled as city financing by Commissioner Ferreira, for example, the Sustainable Urban Development pillar of the European Regional Development Fund, in fact, it's not city financing, because officially in the documents and in the legislation, it's regarded as city financing, but as it's in the shared management system, who decides what is a sustainable urban development project? That's the national government. Is there a single project of the Budapest municipality which was regarded as a sustainable urban development project by the Hungarian government in Budapest? No, not a single one. This means that even those funds which officially and which are reported back by the European Commission as a success story, that we allocate a lot of money to the cities, and this will help the cities to in the climate action or to face with the challenges of migration and refugees and so on and so forth. Simply, it's not happening. And that's why we need much better ways of financing the cities. And one solution, again, is the direct funding. There are several ways of doing that. The most obvious and simple one is to widen or to increase the sums in the existing direct funding schemes, like the European Urban Initiative. For the moment, it's a 500 million euros program for 7 years for 27 member states. You can calculate what does it mean for a city in the EU. It's peanuts. It's even in the budget of Budapest, which is very much limited, it makes no difference, basically. And of course, we have good examples as the funding of the AIDS district, which is a wonderful desegregation program in kindergartens in the AIDS district. Also, the municipality of Budapest won direct funding support from the EU for housing projects, but these are about a couple of millions of euros. and it doesn't help the cities to survive. So I think that we need to turn these direct funding schemes into different type of funding schemes which are able to substantially help the cities to become successful in climate action, in desegregation, in digitalization, and so on and so forth. The second issue, and I will stop here and we can come back to the rest because we have a lot of other messages in the study. The second issue is that, of course, direct funding is important, but there are other ways of helping cities as well. And again, I come back to the example of the Sustainable Urban Development funding. Because what happens here, officially it's a city financing. In practice, very often, these are not the cities who receive the funding. Even in Budapest, that was the government which decided to give money to some suburban railway system projects which were not on the priority list of the city. But what about not centralizing the decision-making on EU funding, but decentralizing decision-making? So let's say, for example, to reform the decision-making system, saying that, for example, Sustainable Urban Development Funds, which is already 8% of the RDF, but we could increase it even to 10%. That was the original proposal we prepared and with colleagues and friends in the European Parliament. It was tabled in as an amendment. Finally, at the trial negotiations, 8% was the outcome, but still we can increase it. But let's make the decisions made on a lower level. So decentralizing the decision-making, not centralizing, not making it a direct funding, but giving the decisions on city financing to the hands of the cities themselves. And not the national government should decide that what is a sustainable urban development project, who can get access to SUD sources, but let's make decision-making panels or levels on the regional or local level who can decide on that money. And these, for example, the SUD money, which could be 8 or even 10% of the ERDF, it would suddenly mean billions of euros only in Hungary. Because these are the real amount of money which could help the cities to really substantially improve their performance on these areas. Because in fact, the actual European urban initiative, direct funding money only for Hungary is 30 times more than the entire European urban initiative. So seemingly the majority of the money is still distributed in the shared management system. But if we can move parts of this enormous amount of money to the local level to be decided on, that could help the cities in a way which doesn't need centralizing the decision making. There is quite a strong resistance from the member states. None of the member states love the idea to give money up towards to the Commission instead of distributing themselves. Also, this wouldn't need additional bureaucratic administrative capacity in the Commission, and other argument which we meet very often, that why it is not possible to create direct funding schemes. So this could solve a lot of problems. And that's my last message, that we can talk about the direct funding, but also let's open our minds to other creative solutions, because I think that there is no silver bullet for this problem. There are several possible and potential solutions, and we have to map up them systematically, that how can we ensure a better access for cities to EU funding, to make them successful to protect European democracy, to become front runners of democratizing the EU, and also to achieve the joint and common European goals.
Thank you very much. I think we will return to the question whether there is a trend change or a possibility of trend change in the European Union towards more decentralization. I don't see that trend, but we will argue. We will discuss about that later on. But I would like to bring Pietro in the discussion and ask him. He is representing Eurocities, which is a network of more than 200 cities in 38 countries. So actually beyond the European Union's borders, well beyond the borders. So Pietro, how can cities inspire each other, and are there any best practices of cities which can access more European funds and maybe manage them very effectively? Could you give us some specific examples?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here on behalf of Eurocities. With Eurocities, we've been working very closely with Budapest, and our former president has been a strong, let's say, supporter, of course, of this cause of better access for funding for our Central Eastern European cities. And we're very happy to be here to discuss today the issue of direct funding. Maybe let me start by saying that I come from Brussels, where yesterday we had a meeting in the European Parliament with several of our mayors and various members of the European Parliament to really discuss what is the role of cities in the future of Europe. And this is quite important because, of course, we are about to start the campaign for the next European election. So it's a moment where we can look back at what has been achieved in the past Commission mandate, and also look how we move forward in the future to create a stronger partnership between cities and Europe. And one of the messages that came out very strongly from those discussions is that cities are at the front of delivering all the transformations that Europe is asking its member states, its communities to bring forward with the European Green Deal. And you won't achieve all this transformation of behaviors, of institutions, of markets, of networks without working at the city level to really develop these concrete solutions. So this is a clear message that we had yesterday, and also what we heard from the mayors, which is very important, is that there is no way to move back from the strong commitment on climate action. There are discussions now with the elections of some parties trying to move back from this important effort on the climate crisis. And so this is something that the mayors really understand, that we cannot move back. We need to deliver on the climate crisis. And in the next cycle of the Commission, there will be a strong focus on implementing this European Green Deal. In this Commission mandate, we focused a lot on developing the legislations, the regulations to make this transition happen. But now we will have to deliver and to implement all these rules. And how do you implement them if not at the local level? And it will be very, very important that we keep this relationship between cities and European institutions to have a reality check of how this transformation are going, how these regulations are impacting everyday life. And I think it's very important to come back also to what the mayor of Budapest was saying today. There is a risk of not factoring in the reactions of citizens on strong and ambitious climate action. So it will be very important to use cities, to use the direct contact with mayors to have a reality check on the implementation of the European Green Deal. So this is quite important. Another important point that came from the discussions is also the role of cities in bringing new ideas in the innovations that are needed to deliver this societal transformation. And I'm sure we might have a chance to talk about the mission that the European Commission launched to have 100 climate and neutral smart cities by 2030. And of course, we will have to see how we provide the tools and the resources for cities to make this happen. But it's clear that this European Commission understands the importance of working with cities. The problem is how do we institutionalize this relationship, and how do we provide the tools for cities to then deliver on these new partnerships and to deliver all these transformations. And so this is the big difficult part. And as Eurocities, we're there in Brussels to really make sure that we can build this cooperation better. And one of the ways to improve this cooperation is not just cooperating on having better regulation and developing European-wide initiatives that bring innovation, but it's also about implementing European funds. So I'm coming to your question, which is, okay, what is the situation on the implementation of European funds at the city level? We heard from the Commissioner that there is already quite some resources on the table, and I just want to highlight that now we have 8% for sustainable urban development. In the past programming period, it was 5%. So we have moved forward, and of course, I fully agree, it's not enough. It's not enough, and as Eurocities, we think that we should move even further. But we also think that we should probably build on some of the successes that we already can see from the past programming period where this 5% was implemented. And just let me highlight a few examples, and the complexity of the example is that, as Benedek was saying, you have this possibility of this earmarking for sustainable urban development investments. So basically, the national governments need to provide give 8% of these resources to cities and urban areas. How they do it, it's not so clear, and then there are very different ways of doing it. So let me just highlight that in some cases, this is done in a relatively good way in the philosophy of shared management of multi-level governance. And so, for instance, in Italy, in the past programming period, it was created an operational program for metropolitan cities, for the 12 biggest metropolitan cities in Italy, which provided, I think, more than 1.5 billion euros over 7 years. And this was even topped up with REACT-EU when in the middle of the pandemic crisis. So you almost had around 3 billion euros that reached these 12 biggest cities. And this was very successful, I think, from what our members tell us. And it really gave the tools and to really deliver these public investments for sustainable urban development transformation. And this was done in an integrated way at the local level. And of course, it was relatively easy because most of these big cities were governed by the same party of the national government. Is no longer the case in Italy also, so let's see how this will develop in the future. But this is already a very concrete examples where cities were intermediary bodies also in the implementation of cohesion funds. Another interesting example is Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Rotterdam is one of the few managing authorities of cohesion funds, which means that they're directly implementing these funds, and they're building the strategy and so on and so forth, which is a very good example that I think would be important to look a bit more in details. Let's also be clear that Rotterdam for the period got 25 million euros, and of course it's much less, and it was they were actually focusing their action in just one neighborhood of the cities with this 25 million at the private neighborhood, and very, very interesting example. And last but not least, Brno in Czech Republic, very interesting case because there Brno, I think, got around 200 million euros to develop integrated territorial investments, and through this, let's say, strategy that was actually done at the metropolitan level, the city has been able to really transform itself, and I think there are some good examples out there, and of course, with all these examples, it's clear that the good relationship with the national government is essential. So it's something that we should probably discuss how we can mainstream these good examples, also in cases where it's difficult to work with the national government. So that's a very important point. One last point, because because cohesion funds are the biggest source for resources concretely for cities, because Horizon and Innovation Fund, they don't fund the infrastructures, they fund the innovation, the innovative projects. It's a couple of millions that often you have to share in a consortium with partners. So it's important to keep this in mind, that different funding sources can fund different things in the city, but still I don't want to say that innovation funds, Horizon Europe and the European Urban Initiative are not important. And it's interesting to see that many cities are organizing themselves to develop a team dedicated to compete for these projects, and some successful cities have been able to really build a portfolio of projects that is driving innovative ideas, innovative solutions through European funds in the city. So this is quite interesting. Of course, we also have to be aware that competition-driven funds take a lot of resources of the city. So it's something that should be considered. But I have many other points, but I will stop here for the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much. You have touched upon a couple of very important issues, like the relationship between a government, national government, and a city, and I think this is crucial here. But what I would like to ask now is looking a little bit into the future, and I will ask Kotka, how do you see, is there any goodwill in the Commission and in the member states to give cities more direct access of funds in the next budget? How do you see that? Or cities will have to, compete or struggle for more money?
Well, I believe a very essential part of representation is that you constantly compete and struggle for causes that you believe in. And you have to push for your vision, no matter if it is hard or easy, because that's what we are doing as politicians, right? It's like we fight for what we think is good. So yes, of course, certainly that we have to fight for a lot of things. But to be a bit more concrete, if I look forward to the next MFF, like the next multi-year budget, that is a very important point, first of all, that it will be decided by the next parliament. And in 8 months, we will also vote on how this parliament looks like. And based on which vision, this money that will determine how Europe is phased, how Europe is shaped for the next decade, it will be also decided at the polls, in a way. Because, when we look at the budget and the discussions around it, there are issues that are more technical and more philosophical. And I'm not saying that technical is not important, because like everything is important, which is about money and funding, right? This is the roads and the bridges and the infrastructure that we all live in day by day. But for instance, there are very important adjustments that have to be made no matter who will be there. So you touched upon it, Pietro. First of all, bureaucracy. If I talk to mayors, particularly mayors of small cities, what they always tell me is that they have no idea how to apply for funds, because they don't have the people, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the connections, and they're hearing from the press that there are some direct funding, but nobody's helping them. They don't know. And this is where we really have to put more infrastructure to make it less bureaucratic, to cut the red tape, and to provide more assistance for the cities. Or we can also take a more bird's-eye view on this issue. And I really want to do this here, because when we talk about budget, it sometimes might appear that this is only a technical issue. There are all these abbreviations and four-letter words and quite wrapped in a technicality. But I think the budget is not technical. The budget is very, very political. And when we'll discuss the next 7 years budget, we will also discuss what type of Europe do we want for our citizens. What is our vision for our community? Do we want a Europe that is strong, that is united, a European Commission that is able to not only have visions and ideas, but also have the means to implement it? Or do we want a fragmented Europe where governments are battling each other, where European action is halted because of actual political developments or elections or whatever is in member states? And I think that through providing more access and more strength to the Commission, particularly through more directly funded channels, we could also give a possibility for the Commission to have more influence in shaping how Europe looks like. Because I find it absolutely untenable, what also Benedek mentioned, that we talk about how important the Green Deal is, or how important the rule of law is. And then there is the money, and they give it to the government, and we are hoping that they will be nice. Can we still hope that every single government will be nice? Can we still hope that every actor is an actor of goodwill that is there to act for the benefit of its citizens? I don't think we can afford this luxury anymore. We have been halted in our European project through the commissioners very often closing their eyes, looking the other way, and hoping that these problems that they hope to be isolated might just like go away with the elections. They won't. If we want to stand up for European citizens, we have to stand up for their right to equally benefit from our European goals, no matter where they live. They can live in a country with a perfect democracy, or they can live in a country like Hungary, which is no longer a democracy, and they still have to have the means to be able to benefit from the equal goods. So this is why I think that it's a very focused approach on how to strengthen local communities and how to give more power to the Commission, but also to the very local level when it comes to distributing money is absolutely crucial. And I would like to add one more aspect here that has to be done even before the next budget. Because there are two things that this parliament is still dealing with. So first of all, we are dealing with the revision of our current budget. And I think these issues have already need to be addressed there. And there is a possibility, I think, to ask for reforms and raises in this portfolio, because we now can take stock of how Europe has developed and how important cities were and how ineffective very often the Commission was to stand up for our cities in the face of the climate crisis, of the values crisis, the pandemic and all that. So we need to work already on the revision, not only to wait until 2027 to get some changes implemented, but do it already now. And the second thing that is absolutely crucial, and for us Hungarians I think it's very special, but I clearly think that we have to lead the way in Europe here, to take a second look at the rule of law conditionality. I negotiated this proposal and I'm very proud of that, and I think it's a very huge advancement. But this is an incomplete implementation so far, because it says, and the Parliament really asked for this provision to be there, the protection of final beneficiaries is there on paper. But this is why our group, the Renew group, is pushing for an addition of the so-called smart conditionality proposal, so to pair it more explicitly, the conditionality process where you can stop funds from autocratic governments, to pair it with more direct sources to the citizens in case the conditionality is applied. So these are immediate reforms that we really have to try to achieve in the last 8 months that is left from the mandate, and I really hope that coming next year, a strong pro-European majority in the next parliament will be able to fight for this grand overhaul our European community and our European citizens so desperately need, also through the budget and through other means as well.
Thank you, Katka. And over to Ben, just on the basis of what Katka was just saying, are there really chances for Budapest to get more funds? Even like talking about the review of the budget, is there a chance there? Or from the next European budget, which will be decided, as Katka said, by the next parliament. So we are kind of talking about very blurred picture. And could there be perhaps a fund set up for cities in the next European budget, or that's just too far-fetched?
Yeah, I think it's very important to distinguish between the short-term and the long-term perspective. On the short-term, there are two options touched upon by Katka already. One is the midterm review of the actual MFF. Unfortunately, this exercise is more or less already done. So the Commission came up with its proposal, and it's going to be discussed and adopted in the Parliament in a very quick way. And this midterm review, when we wrote our study, it was early summer. They were still waiting for the Commission proposal. So we dealt quite a lot with the midterm review with the hope that we can influence the Commission's proposal on the midterm review. At the end of the day, the Commission proposal concentrates almost fully to the new challenges of the EU in relation to the war in Ukraine, which is completely understandable. And some things to address the climate action, also in relation to energy independence from Russia. And there is not really too much in the Commission proposal regarding the cities. Still, the parliamentary discussion is going on, if I'm right. So there is still some room for maneuver to include something in the midterm review, but I think that we cannot expect a fundamental change in the existing and functioning multi-annual financial framework. The other short-term opportunity is what was already mentioned, is the rule of law conditionality and the RRF. Super milestones and conditions. And here it's an interesting area because there are some uncertainties what's going to happen. The discussions between the Hungarian government and also the Polish government and the Commission are quite unpredictable, but we are running out of time, for example, in the case of the RRF. Because the project should be completed before the summer of 2026. So projects not started early next year or mid next year, they are not going to be finished till the deadline. So here there is a quite strong time pressure on the Hungarian government and the Commission as well. And to be honest, I don't see the quick development of those talks between the government and the Commission, which raises the risk of permanent or final loss of EU funds for the country. And also there are some internal deadlines in the operational programs, the ERDF and other cohesion funds. And if we surpass those deadlines without having a final agreement around the operational programs and the conditions related to them. Also, there are some risks, not a total loss of funding, but at least partial funding loss. And these measures, like the RRF, are completely new, unprecedented, so there is no experience what happens if the national government is not able to deliver in these programs. But also there was no any example before in the history of the EU that a member state, because of conditionality discussions with the Commission, was not able to use parts of its money. And there are no clear rules that what should happen with the money not paid for a member state. Because those measures which were implemented before, it was like if there is a specific project which proved to be corrupt or misuse of EU funds, let's speak in a EU language. So if there are some misuse of funds, what happens? Okay, the EU is not going to finance the project itself, but the national government can send another bill for another project. But in the actual case, with the rule of law conditionality discussions, there is the chance that there will be no opportunity for the member state, for Hungary, to send other bills, and the funds are completely lost. And in this case, we don't see that what should happen with this money. And here I see an opportunity for the cities to come into the discussion, to set up new channels of financing, to redirect those funds which are not sipped up, not used by a member state, and put them in a different new kind of financing channel, being it a direct funding or from some other kind of funding channels. And there is the long-term perspective, the post-27 MFF. Here I see very good chances to improve the situation. We already had a lot of discussions with the Commission, and there is a kind of openness to scan and to map up how the EU budget could be become more effective in supporting cities to deliver and to perform better in the joint European targets and goals, simply because the Commission started to understand that cities are more and more important globally and also in the EU. Many of the, as we already discussed, many of the EU goals depends on the cities, and also they started to understand that there might be differences in interests between the national governments and the cities, and not only from political perspective. Of course, what is happening in Hungary, it's a special case, or in Poland, or what could happen in Italy, we don't know yet, but let's see. But even in the best case, where the city governments and the national governments are loving each other and they try to cooperate in the best way and with the best will, simply, the city interests are slightly, or priorities are slightly different from the national interests and priorities. And sometimes city interests are closer to the EU priorities, and the EU can do the best to achieve its own goals and targets and priorities with aligning strongly and better with the cities than it's doing right now. And allocating more money to cities could help the cities to perform better in areas where the EU expects very much from the cities. They should deliver 70% or 75% of the mitigation in the EU, the CO2 emission cuts in the EU. And it makes sense to give the sources directly to the cities if the EU wants to see them to deliver in these areas. And this is, I think, started to be understood in the EU. So I see really good chances to have an influence on the post-27 MFF. Of course, for that, we need good arguments. I think we have quite good arguments. We need good allies in the Parliament and in the Council, and that's crucial, because I think that very much will depends on the Council. But for that, I think that we have to have good selling points. How can we convince the Commission, member state governments, cities to sign up for what we are proposing? And here, and that's I think a very important message, and also one of the conclusions of our study, that it's not enough to come up with saying that, wow, we need better financing for cities. We have to come up with very detailed and targeted proposals, and we have to sell them to the decision makers one by one. Because in different measures or different tools, perhaps there are different alliances to support them, and there are different arguments to support them. And if we can come up with detailed and very targeted proposals that we need, for example, including multi-level governance, subsidiarity, the rights of the municipal system into the country-specific recommendations, for example, in the framework of the European semester, this is something where the member state governments could be our allies, because there is nothing really too much against for them to strengthen the European semester and to include those things into the CSRs. In other cases, perhaps we can come up with anti-corruption argumentation, we can come up with the evidences that cities can better contribute to joint European goals. So we have to detect and to identify the good arguments for the different specific solutions and measures, and to sell them one by one in different decision-making processes.
Thank you very much. We're almost at the end of our time, but I would like to have Pietro to comment on what was said before, whether you are optimistic about the Commission to give more money to cities. And then I would also bring in the audience, so you will have the chance to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, I mean, a lot was said. I'll try to be brief. I think one word about the context that we're going into. The next European budget, with a new majority in the European Parliament and a new Commission, is not a given that will be as ambitious as it was this time. So this is a bit the starting point. So we have to be realistic about what we can achieve within this context. Another important thing, and of course we can aim high and dream, and of course make our voices heard, but this is a bit the context. Another important thing is the future of cohesion policy. Cohesion policy, it has its problems, shared management, and it's probably not enough to say you give money to the national government for cities and you expect to give them in a good way. So let's work on that. But also cohesion policy is in danger. We have to be realistic about this. We have to be aware that cohesion policy, its model, it's been threatened by the model that was used for the recovery and resilience facility, for the recovery plan. And this is a model that is even more centralized and more dangerous. There are ongoing discussions on making cohesion policy look more like the recovery fund, which means more performance-based and not based on cost. Hopefully, if we make cohesion policy more similar to the recovery, we also manage to keep the values of multi-level governance and partnership principle in cohesion. This is fundamental, because if we bring the centralization together with the model of the RRF, we are going to be in great danger. Another important point to stress is, though, if we move to a model that is more similar to the recovery and resilience facility, it means that together with resources, the Commission will also be more strict about reforms that they want to see. I mean, this was the big added value or novelty of the recovery and resilience plan. And if you have more reforms that you ask to the member states, some of these reforms could be about stronger fiscal decentralization, especially in Central and Eastern European countries, where fiscal decentralization is not there, and a system was built on a dependence on European funds without thinking long term. If a region becomes richer and will receive in the long term, of course, less European resources, how will they be resilient in the long term with good own resources? So I think it's very important to keep to bring this discussion about how do we make, how do we build strong and fiscally decentralized local authorities, and how we can use cohesion policy to push for that. That's fundamental, because also, when we look at the issue of financing cities, European funds, cohesion funds, they usually can only fund investment, capital investment, and they cannot fund current expenditure. So a lot of the financial problems also of the cities are about having enough people working to deliver those services and to make this transition happen. And the European funds cannot solve everything. I think another important point that we should probably highlight together is the economic governance rules that have a strong impact on the fiscal capacity of cities. This is quite important. Since the 2008 crisis, we had a lot of fiscal consolidation through the European rules, and this fiscal consolidation was usually affecting mostly local authorities that had their budget cut and their ability to raise taxation cut. I was talking with some Hungarian colleague, and they were telling me that for Budapest, I don't know, in the past 2 decades, it went from something like 12% of taxation on revenues through taxation to 6%. I mean, this is very important. We should work on that. So I think this is something that, yeah, will be very important to bring, not only to have more direct funding, but also to have more, better financed cities. This is quite important. Not to mention the role of the European Investment Bank to develop also more public-private partnership, but also using more innovative financing schemes. If we look at the investment needs at city level, we need all sources of funding. So one solution will not bring the results that we need. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Of course, there is one thing we have not touched upon, that was the private public funding, which is very important. But I'm turning to the audience. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
Alexander Folody. Forgive me for expressing a slight note of scepticism and possibly cynicism, but isn't this discussion slightly academic, bearing in mind that the MFF is one of the areas where member states enjoy a veto power, as they do in foreign policy, and if it's important to, say, the Hungarian government to be able to bleed municipalities like Budapest to keep them under control as opposition power bases, this is just any proposal that means a significant adjustment in the way the budget is delivered will just face the veto barrier in the Council.
Thank you very much. Any other question? I think we should collect a couple of... No. So, okay. Who would like to answer? Kotka?
So, well, your question, I think, touches upon the heart of the problems, like the core. Why do we have actual issues? I do think that, as a general note, and I will answer more specifically to your question as well, but as long as we have unanimity rules standing in the Council, that it will continue to pose an exceeding barrier to any sort of reform or change or adjustment that could make the EU more capable and more ready to adapt to the challenges of the times and more ready to be able to protect and support its citizens. Because there is always one government who has one problem. And it can be a legitimate problem, and then you can talk about it. But also, you can have malign actors sitting at the big table who might or might not serve the interest not only of the European public, not only of their own citizens, but the interest of those external actors who would prefer a weak and fragmented Europe, contrary to a strong, thriving, and democratic one. So I think this is also a huge challenge for us in the coming years on how to transform and enlarge the EU, but also how to reform the way we work and how we can be more effective in delivering results and real and meaningful reforms. And unanimity is a clear barrier, and I actually have hopes that together with the discussion of enlargement, maybe we can overcome this, at least in certain areas, and then expand more. But coming to your question, so if we would say that, yeah, do every single type of European funding through direct channels, I mean, even I wouldn't agree with that. I don't think that would work, and probably that would be something that is unrealistic. But to talk about more meaningful support for cities, more directly targeted funds, and of course the MFF is a large area. If you are smart, if you negotiate well, you can very well put together an MFF that can serve the interest of the majority of the government. And this is really, I think, the art of what we are doing in Brussels, right? To find a balance, to find compromises, to find a landing zone. And this is why I'm also so sad to see the Hungarian government sitting at those tables where you can really achieve a lot if you negotiate well, just to avoiding negotiations and avoiding pushing for actually standing up for what is important for Hungarians, and they are choosing to this like veto card, like, I don't know, a child with a temper tantrum. But I think that also the discussions when we approved the last MFF together with the recovery plan and the rule of law conditionality was a situation where separately, probably any of these legislations would have been very, very hard to put through. But if you are smart, if you put different things together and you make everybody interested in passing them as a bundle, for instance, then boom, there comes this avenue. And this is the art of diplomacy, and this is the art of negotiating. And I'm very hopeful that the next parliament and also the next commission will be composed of skillful and talented diplomatic negotiators who will be able to overcome this barrier to, which could stand between constructing a budget that serves Europe's interests interest of a strong and powerful and geopolitical Europe, the interest of the citizens who would just like to enjoy the benefits and live a quiet and normal life in a safe and healthy environment, to pass this. This will be a challenge, but, well, I suppose we are here for that, no? And we have very good examples where Europe can grow and overcome crises, so let's hope that the next parliament will be able to sustain this good track record.
Yeah, but thank you. It's absolutely not cynical or skeptical. That's the heart of the matter. So it's a very good question. And I agree that, of course, there are some things which are, of course, unrealistic. If we would come up, if we came up with the proposal to pick the complete cohesion policy or ERDF financing from direct management, of course, it's unrealistic. It needs treaty change and things like that. But we are not proposing anything like that. And I think that what we are doing and what we are proposing in the study and what we have been doing as the city of Budapest and as the representation of the city of Budapest in Brussels is to create alternatives, new solutions, and to push them step by step. And I agree that this way it's absolutely open to us. Already in the previous MFF, when we started lobbying in Brussels in 2020, the current MFF was very close to be adopted by the co-legislators. Still, we were able, in cooperation with the European Parliament, with the Green Group in the European Parliament, also with Hungarian MEPs, including Katka, we were able to change at this very last moment in the regulation, the CPR regulation, in the ERDF regulation, in many elements. For example, we changed the Connecting Europe facility to make municipalities as eligible entities to apply for Connecting Europe facility sources. We included the obligation for the member state governments for a meaningful consultation with the local level in the recovery facility and also in the operational programs. And now we, as the city of Budapest, is discussing with the Commission and the government to push them to include financing into the shared management system in the operational programs for Budapest, and we are successful in that because 3 or 4 years ago we were able to lobby in those paragraphs into the legislation which are about the necessity of a meaningful consultation, and if it's not there, then the Commission is ready to say no for payments for the Hungarian government. So I think this is just to say that this is of course an uphill battle, but there are several options and several ways to go. We have to try all of them, and I think that we have quite a good track record, that we are good in this kind of lobbying, and we can make it.
Thank you very much. Our time is up. Thank you very much for your participation. I hope we could give you some positive messages and good examples, and I wish you fruitful discussions in the afternoon coming up. Thank you.